What's up, everyone? Andrew from NineLeaders, and today I've got a very special guest. He is a business, politics, and macroeconomics analyst, writer, and commentator. He has been quoted in the Financial Times. He has been quoted by Time Magazine. He has been quoted by AlJazeera. He's been consistently rated as one of 100 top young influential South Africans. And he speaks directly into what our mission at NineLeaders is, which is to equip new and experienced leaders with the skills required to take on 2021 and beyond. If this is the first time to the channel, welcome. It's great to have you. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, the like button, and smash the subscribe button. So enjoy. I definitely enjoyed this conversation. This is Phumlani, Majozi. Phumlani, Majozi, welcome to NineLeaders. It's absolutely fantastic to have you. Are you keeping well?
I'm keeping well, Andrew. It's great to be on your podcast. It's my first time here, and I look forward to our chat. I think I'll enjoy it.
Absolutely. I think it's somebody I wanted to have on the show for a while now. We've been working around our schedules, getting all of that ready, and we finally got to manage it. We're obviously part of the same business network. So a shout out to all the smutbies that might be listening. But there was really two reasons for me to really have you on the show. And the first being, I've followed a number of your videos, a lot of your interviews that you do, and read a lot of the articles that you put out periodically. And you're a thought leader in the field of economics and politics, obviously. And it's incredibly important as leaders that we are aware of the bigger environment that we operate in. Obviously, to be able to take advantage of opportunities or to look out for potential red flags that might impact on our business. So really understanding those bigger factors. So you're the person to be able to do that. And that's why I wanted to have you on. The second reason is, and full disclosure, I'm completely doff when it comes to economics and politics. So I wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth. You've got a lot of strong opinions, and that's really, really perfect. And really just to be able to speak into young leaders' lives, how can they be aware, like I said, of what's happening in the world around them, and how can they possibly take advantage? So we're going to start on, we're not going to be able to solve all the world's problems in 45 minutes, I'm sure, but I really look forward to your insight and your opinion on a lot of topics. We're going to start off on a macro scale. What is happening in the world, in your opinion, right now? How are things on a global scale impacting South Africa? You've mentioned in one of your recent articles with regards to the South African trade, and specifically with the US, and how important that's going to be potentially going forward, despite any political considerations with regards to particularly like the Palestinian question and all of that. But what do you see in the current state? What are the opportunities? And what are some of the things that we need to watch out for as leaders?
Well, the state right now, we're in a state of a recovery, Andrew. It's a recovery after, lockdowns in many countries around the world over the past year because of COVID-19 pandemic, right? Yeah. So governments had to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, and part of that process, the response process, was that they implemented lockdowns, which basically meant you and I had to sort of change the way we used to work. Well, if we were lucky, we changed the way we work, or at least we're allowed to change the way we work. Some people lost those opportunities, Andrew. They lost their jobs. They could no longer go back. Businesses, were decimated. And many of them are not going to come back, right? So there were those huge changes that basically affected on a very big scale economic productivity, right? How we trade, who could trade what. There was a knockoff on the supply side, in the production, goods being supplied to shops and so on. There was a knockoff there. That process was impacted. There was also a knockoff on the demand side, because you and I were freely, could go out at any point in time to go to the mall and participate in the economic productivity, right? Yeah. We could go back, we could go maybe sell if we are selling something, right? But there was a huge, the demand side was very much impacted. We couldn't go out for movies, right? Tourism was impacted, so we couldn't be able to buy those tourism services as people who consume that aspect of the economy. So there were those two kinds of knockoffs that took place over the past year. Now, where are we now, right? So what has happened over the past year or months is that governments have tried to sort of remove those lockdowns, right? They've put in the vaccination process, right? Of course, the rate at which the vaccination programs sort of are going in different countries are different, the rates, right? They're different. Some countries are doing things speedily. We have in South Africa, when you look at the major emerging markets, we have sort of mismanaged our COVID-19 procurement process over the past months, right? Even government has acknowledged that. Yeah. So, and then the governments have been sort of, uplifting those lockdowns, reopening, pushing on the vaccination programs. We're in that process now where basically we are recovering from those lockdowns. When you look at South Africa, the contraction last year of our economy was 7%, right? And it was the biggest contraction in 100 years, in a century, right? Yeah. So there was a huge knockoff there, and unemployment has continued to rise in South Africa, right? And the youth is the most impacted, right? Government debt continues to be not in good shape as well. It continues to rise. So there's been a huge impact over the past year in countries, and we are recovering from that. Now, the question here now that we watchers of politics and macroeconomics, policy and all that, the question now that we are asking or discussing is around, which country is going to recover fast, right? Which country is recovering faster when it comes to coming back from the knockoff effects that I've just mentioned that took place over the past year. Yeah. And I was reading a summary of the recent International Monetary Fund report, where basically they were saying that there are imbalances on the recoveries, right? In fact, IMF projects that South Africa will underperform the major emerging markets this year in terms of economic growth, and it will also underperform emerging markets next year as well, right? So it's 2021 and 2022, right? So that's the major emerging markets comparison. Yeah. But they also look at how will South Africa do compared to the global growth average, global rate, right? Will also underperform there as well, right? So there is that issue that is taking place right now. We're basically watching who's recovering at what speed, what are the constraints, and so on. And what the IMF says is that the developed world will kind of reopen faster by end of this year, right? And they see economic productivity kind of bouncing back a bit better than the developing countries that are largely, poor and that, left behind in terms of the reopens and the vaccination program. And the Western countries or developed world have been faster in that regard. And as a result, there will be faster reopening for them, and things will sort of go back to normal. So there are those imbalances as well in that recovery, right? That is currently taking place. Now, there's something I need to mention, which is very important, Andrew, and that is something happened when we projected by end of last year how South Africa would do in its recovery. The first quarter of this year sort of beat expectations, right? Yep. When you look at the economists who cover these things, the general consensus is that, South Africa, in fact, the data shows that we're expecting things to be much, much worse by end of last year.
It actually was.
With regards to this year, right? The projections were quite much worse. But then the first quarter sort of beat expectations. We did better than what was expected in terms of recovery, right? Even Mike Schuessler has been sort of vocal on that the numbers that come out, he's a data man. He's very driven by the data, economic data. And he says, we've beat expectations, we've performed better than what it was. But remember, and that's the recovery, right? We are trying to bounce back from the worst position where we were, right? Yeah. So we're bound to, that doesn't mean that the fundamentals, we should be hopeful about the fundamentals, because remember, by third quarter last year, South Africa was in a recession. This was before COVID-19 reached our shores. So we're in a terrible shape when it comes to the economy. So this is just a recovery. I don't want people to say, well, now things are back on track because what was anticipated is better than, I don't want people to think it in that way. This is just a recovery, meaning that we are coming back from a very, very bad time that we had last year. And that recovery has been kind of, at least for the first quarter, was kind of better than what was expected. So that's the recovery now that we are watching, Andrew, and it's the recovery that is watched both in Africa and around the world. And one thing just to add is that part of what is being watched closely, or what is being discussed, is inflation, right? When is inflation going to come back? What are the projections around that? Because, I mean, remember, there are two. But what it tells you when inflation sort of goes up, especially what people are looking at mostly is what's called the demand pull inflation. It's the inflation that is caused by you and I as consumers in the economy to go and basically demand, in other words, buy. We are going to participate in the economy. We are consuming, right? We are buying and consuming. Because if there is more demand, therefore the producers will sort of adjust and increase the price. Therefore, kind of inflation. So that's the kind of inflation that many people are talking about. As to when is it going to come back, and what will be the elements that make up that kind of inflation coming back. And that, by the way, will shape how the central banks will, because remember, they've cut the rates over the past year with the intent to make it cheap for you and I to go and borrow money, so that we are, in other words, encouraging us to go and borrow money and use it to buy and consume in the economy. So that inflation will shape how the central banks respond. Because if it's high inflation, then they will need to adjust, sort of increase the rates in order to damp that down. Because you don't want dangerous inflation where people will no longer afford things. Absolutely. So that's where we are right now. In South Africa, the predictions by some people who are credible is that the pre-COVID-19 inflation levels will sort of bounce back sometime next year. Next year. So in other words, those kinds of inflation will bounce back next year, and that is why people who watch this closely expect that the South African Reserve Bank will go back to the hiking cycle sometime next year. In the early sort of first quarter of next year, they will start increasing the rates again, because that kind of inflation will taking shape. Yeah.
Am I hearing you right then in saying that there's almost two levels to this? One is being able to have the economic recovery in the short term, specifically around the impact that COVID has had on South Africa. And then the second layer is going, well, let's go back to what we were pre-COVID and go, right, then we need to have a look at the growth that we can possibly have after that. So the immediate response is really going, let's just sort out what we need to sort out now, and then long term get back to those plans.
To recover, yes. And by the way, much of what will need to be done for us to recover in this short term we're talking about, it's also the things that will need to be done for us to improve even faster over the long term, right? Lesefa Kganyago, the governor of the Reserve Bank, has been kind of, at least according to my observation, the most sensible, vocal public figure over the past year, where he has basically said, even Tito Mboweni has been sensible as well, where these guys are basically saying the key thing that we need to get right as South Africans, it doesn't have to do really about monetary policy. In other words, the manipulation by the central bank of how much money we should have in the economy, how much interest rates we should set, or they should set as an institution. Our issues in South Africa don't have to do much with that. That can't solve our problems. It cannot. What will solve our problems in the country is what is called structural reforms, right? Structural reforms. Education, we need to reform that, right? Your tax code, you need to reform. Your government spending, you can't spend money you don't have and continue borrowing, increasing government debt, that will come back to that will come back to bite our citizens and the future citizens of this country, right? You need to deal with regulation, right? Whether it's in the labor market, whether it's business regulation, whatever you may be, talking about with respect to regulation. So those are the things that will need to be done in South Africa, right? There's been much complaints about how things are structured in the labor market, the regulatory environment, right? Where unions become very much dominant. And these unions, the labor unions, COSATU and so on, are affiliated with the ANC. People are concerned about that. Well, Liseka is saying that those are the kind of reforms that South Africa needs. And it's what I have been sort of pushing and advancing and preaching and, raising the names of Liseka Kanyako to say that these people are speaking, and many others, these people are speaking common sense. It is what needs to be done in order to address our problems. But to go back to your question, your point, you are saying that there are things that we need to do short term. Yes. And there are things that we need to also do over the long. We still have the long-term challenge in this country, right? Which has to do with many problems, including crime, shocking unemployment rates, depressed economy, no business growth, reform, even with respect to our legal immigration, because we have too many sort of illegal immigrants in South Africa, because the ANC over the past 27 years of our democracy has in many ways sort of mismanaged our borders and the immigration process. And so there are many fundamental issues that over the long term we'll need to resolve. But it's important to say this, and just before, to jump in, it's important to say this, that you said we need to try and be speedy to resolve our issues in order to go back to pre-COVID-19 levels. But it's very important to remind people that those pre-COVID-19 levels were very disappointing still, because we're in a recession, unemployment was rising, crime rates was just shocking, education was very bad, the public education system. You could go on and go on of the fundamental issues that we face. But we need to be clear here that the first step, of course, is to improve on the huge knockoff effect that we got last year. It's better to, as a first step, let's go back to those pre-COVID-19 levels, which should be an improvement compared to where we were last year. And then again as well, we continue in trying to make things better.
All those elements that you've mentioned now is, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but hearing you, those are pretty much within our control. And again, from a leadership side of things, you need to look at and go, what can I control? What can I influence? And what do I just need to accept? So a lot of those elements with structural reform, it's very much within our control. So we need to look inwards as opposed to potentially looking outwards and looking, and what a lot of other countries have gone and done is going, well, let's get foreign investment to try and boost the economy. Let's industrialize our economies to have this big spurt. And then obviously there's elements where mismanagement of money, and now the debt spiral that a lot of countries got into with borrowing money from the West and China and all of those. Are you saying that the biggest drive should be an internal change as opposed to looking outside at factors that they can possibly influence?
Well, we are where we are as a country, right? And by where we are, I'm talking about the state of the economy, which is what you and I are discussing at this point.
Yeah.
We are where we are because of domestic sort of blunders, if I can call them like that. We have to do it. It's us who have to do with what happened for us to be here.
Yeah.
Right. We can't blame other countries. Right. There is a very fascinating data that I once saw, and I once used this in one of my articles last year, where basically it was from the Treasury, where they showed, South Africa's economic growth rates versus the global growth rates over the past, say, 2000. That was sort of the range up until recently, 2019 or so. And before the financial crisis of 2008, of which many people, they always say, they try to blame the financial crisis of 2008 and say, well, South Africa is where we are because there was that financial crisis, and therefore we couldn't bounce back. We can therefore blame the American capitalism, right?
Yeah.
That's what they say. But when you look at the chart, Andrew, what it shows you is that before 2008, the Great Recession, South Africa's economic growth was behaving in tandem, right, with the global growth rates. By that I'm saying the gap between the two, well, basically there was no gap really. It was the same growth rates, right? In other words, if, for example, the global rate was 4%, South Africa would be 3.7% or 4%, exactly, right? So it was the same behavior, right? And where that growth rate was going down, South Africa would go down as well, right? Again, about the same number or close to that number. If it goes up, South Africa's growth rate will also do the same, sort of, get into the same behavior as well, right? But what happens after 2008 is that South Africa, the gap between the global growth rate and South Africa's growth rate became bigger, right? Yes, the behavior was kind of the same, but it became bigger. In other words, the world grew much bigger than us, right? The gap in between became bigger. We're no longer, as compared to the financial crisis, before the financial crisis, we're no longer having the same growth rates, right? So the world kind of bounced back. The world bounced back, but really we couldn't bounce back, right? Now, the question is, well, we were bouncing back to before the financial crisis. Why now are we not? I mean, if that's the behavior, the pattern, we should also be doing the same as usual, as the data shows. Now, that's just a very minor, small kind of information that I'm giving you, basically to say that much of what has been, much of what has shaped our economy in the country has had to do largely with us, right? Our public officials, our public policymakers, citizens, Andrew, citizens who have repeatedly voted for people who persist on the policies that basically leave, people unemployed, sitting at home, repressed economy, crime rates remaining very high, and other fundamental issues that we face as a country. So, to answer your question, my basic short point is that it's us as Africans. These are domestic issues that have led us to where we are, and it is us as South Africans who can resolve them as well going forward.
Absolutely. And just listen here again, as an expert on economics and politics, which drives which? Does politics drive economies? Does economies drive economic policy drive politics? Where do you sit on the fence with that portion? which comes first, the cart or the horse?
Well, the rules of economics to politicians are always broken, right? They break them for the purposes of advancing their political agenda, right? That's what politicians tend to do. So they break the rules of economics. So I wish economics was driving politics, but it tends to be not the case. You see, it's the other way around, where politicians try and shape what the economy becomes. And in South Africa, as I just said now, the politics that we have, our society has sort of shaped the kind of the economy that we are experiencing now, that we are going through. So, each and every societal economic sort of situation is achieved because of a certain political process. We cannot run away from that. Hence, I said, when I blame private citizens in the country, I'm just saying that they could choose better people who can manage the economy better, right? Manage our law and order better, than the current people who are in charge. So I'm saying that because we as citizens in a democracy, we have a power to shape the direction of the country. And I think South Africans have been very careless on the direction of their country, right? And I always say this because there's nothing that troubles me, Andrew, as having an organization, I should say a political movement or organization like the far left, divisive, violent, economic freedom fighters in our legislature, right? Who voted for them? Who voted for these people? Why would you vote for people who advance an ideology or economic principles and values that have basically failed across human history, right?
Yeah.
But that's economics, right? You can debate that if you want to. You can debate that. But there's that element of them, of, violent behavior, right? Threats that are being issued to various racial groups, chaos in our legislature that they've caused for many years. The fact that we as citizens, we can vote for such people and bring them in our legislature. What does that say to us, right? What does it tell about us? It's a big problem, I think.
I suppose the question there would going, well, the structures that we've spoken about, that it is within our control to be able to change certain things and it's our responsibility. Do you feel that there's a bit of a disenfranchisement of people where they say, well, I'm doing this, but it's not changing. So we need to almost pull the entire structure down to restart. Is that a possibility potentially?
Well, there is a lot of misinformation there. Look, everyone feels the pain, right? Everyone from the middle class to the lower class to a man selling on the street, everybody feels the pain in South Africa, right? It's just that the level of the pain, of course, is different, depending on your social background or not even your economic background, but your class where you are. Your level of pain it's much greater if you're a very poor person, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is great for you as well if you're a middle class person, but not as great as the person who's right at the bottom.
Yeah.
Right? So everyone is affected. Now, we understand that everybody is affected by the dire state of our society, right? Now we are going to have one small group that will misinform people. And say that, well, because we are in this dire state that you feel as a South African citizen, you are feeling this pain, we therefore have a plan, and that plan is to seize everything that X amount of people own, or this special type of people own, and then we are going to distribute it around to you, right? We are going to impose more regulations on business, and we know what the impact of that is. Are going to continue to unionize education in order to fix these problems. Let's unionize education to fix the problems that you, as an ordinary man, you feel, that we feel as well. Here's a plan that we have, right? Now, if I come out as someone who's radical, passionate, always saying there are these people who have something. Yeah, there are these people who have something that can improve your life. We just need to find a way of getting that thing and give it to you, right? And for people who are not sophisticated or kind of understand how the economy works, and what it takes to build an economy that is more productive, that creates jobs, that results in business growth, they're going to say, hey, we hear you. You think you have because remember what these guys who are promoting that idea, what they say sounds very easy, right? It sounds, just take from one person and give it to another, right? Yeah. But they don't sort of realize that in that process will cause a huge damage, right? And because of that misinformation, people fall for that, and they therefore end up supporting such people who are saying they have to, who are saying they will dismantle the system and make it more into their favor. So my point is that there has to be some level of education, and people should educate themselves as well as to how do things work. don't listen to what the politician tells you and to take it at face value.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Rather, try to understand the history of what this politician says. What are the basics on how economy works, or how economies work, and then you can, sort of, that can shape how you vote, because you know that this, if I vote for these people, they will lead the country into a disaster. If I vote for these people, things will be better, right? Because this is how things work. It's not just, populist politicians who are spreading the idea of, let's take from one person and give to another. So people and give to another. So people have to educate themselves here, Andrew. And educating themselves will shape how they vote, and that will be better for the country that is South Africa.
So the principles, really, I mean, if you go back to 2012, was sort of that economic recovery plan. We spoke about employment, opportunities, education. Those are still 100% relevant to taking us forward out of this, not only from a COVID time, but actually from pre-COVID 2019. Those are still the elements and the principles that are going to be applicable in the next 5 years, 10 years for us to be able to recover, right?
Yes. But you see, the thing is, when you look at what happens in the ANC, is that by the ANC, I refer to them because they are the governing party.
Yeah.
And they are currently sort of, shaping our public policy. So what happens in the ANC is that there is always, you will find a few people then there who will say something different than what was decided at a party conference. Yeah, exactly. Who will sort of stand alone and saying, and they will say something sensible. For example, Tito Mboweni, he has been quite sensible. He even released his document of what should be, how we should, revive the country's economy, which was a very sensible document, which is what should have been applied to sort of, fasten our economy. Applied even before, even after COVID-19. I mean, even after the lockdowns we had last year, that document is applicable. It's what should have been, or what should be done to recover our economy. So you have those people who say, basically, there are divisions. You are going to have one or two people who will come out and say, well, here's something that we need to do. And it tends to be sensible. But then, well, the politics of the ANC will constrain and, stop that from happening, right? Because then some affiliates will come and say, well, we don't approve of this. And by affiliates, I'm talking about the Communist Party. Yeah. I'm talking about the COSATU Federation. They will come and then it disappears in the air, right? That proposed document. And that's what happened to Mboweni's solution. We're told, well, it's going to the ANC, it's being discussed. Well, there has to be some, eventually it became something else, right? Yeah. Not what it was. So there has been a few kind of sensible people who have proposed sensible things in the ANC, and those things, and by things I'm talking about basically the economic recovery plans or economic plans and so on, and those things they disappear in the, because of the internal politics of the ANC
and the agenda.
And those things you touched on, education, reform of some sort, SOEs and so on, those things, it's exactly what needs to be done. And some people within the ANC do see that, but they tend to be people who think differently from what is usually discussed and finalized and agreed upon at a specific party conference. So those are the dynamics of the ANC, and they are in a way the dynamics that are slowing our progress, or our economic progress, to be specific.
If you had to look at your crystal ball, next elections, who do you think is going to be the biggest winners? Who do you think is going to be the biggest losers?
Well, there's a problem we have in South Africa, and that is people choose to go sit home than vote. As a result, the people who go and vote, the people who sit home, the number of people who sit home is greater than the number of people who go out and vote. That's a big problem. you see, because it means that what and many of those people who choose to go home are people who have been voting for the ANC before, many of them, and they just cannot choose to vote for someone else. Rather they go and sit home instead of going to put another another party in power.
Yeah. So it's
And
really
that's a
about
big
that apathy of not actually taking some action around the control that you do possibly have. You've got this element of control, but you're not making use of it.
Yeah, you rather choose to stay at home.
Mm.
And when you look at the number of people who do go out to vote, right, the majority of them still favor the ANC.
Mm.
Now, that means the ANC will still largely remain in power because most people choose to sit at home and not vote.
Yeah.
Smaller number does go out, and then in that smaller number, the majority of the vote goes to the ANC, right? The EFF has grown quite faster since its existence, Andrew. They've grown quite faster, doubled their numbers in the previous elections. The DA did grow, but then it became stagnant.
Yeah.
Right. So to be specific on the answer to your question, the ANC, in this foreseeable future will remain the winner.
Yeah.
And it will remain the winner because most people basically are sitting at home, and those who do go to vote, they largely favor the ANC, and that, I think, is a huge problem in the country. It's one of the huge problems in the country.
So it's really, you mentioned two levels on with regulatory reform. That's really a function of government, but as individual citizens, our opportunity to take control is to be able to vote for a particular party that will make those regulatory changes, if that's the case. From a business perspective, what would your advice be to? And we've spoken quite a bit in the press, and we've seen the importance of that, not only in the informal sector, but that entrepreneurial mindset. And as South Africans, we do have a very entrepreneurial mindset. How important is that element to the greater economy in South Africa? Or is it as important as we say it is? Or is it really, are we governed by the fact that the big exports, things like platinum and gold and our diamonds and titanium and all of those things? Is it on that macro scale that's really going to solidify the country? Or is it more around mobilizing on the smaller scale, those entrepreneurs to really bring small business through to the fore?
I strongly believe in small businesses, SMEs, they call them.
Yeah.
I think that's where there's potential. That's where we need to push as citizens, right? That's where we need to basically even in our government have people who are favorable to that idea of having entrepreneurs growing as fast as possible. I think entrepreneurship is key here. And by the way, we are talking about businesses in townships, right? In small towns, right? These are people who I think will make a huge difference on the grounds. The big companies that are producing, or basically whether producing and selling locally or overseas in these big industries, fine, they can exist, right? And they should grow, right? But I mean, I think the huge impact can be at the ground here, or ought to be at the ground. Entrepreneurs, and it doesn't have to be only in big metropolitan areas. It's got to be in small towns, in the Eastern Cape, in KwaZulu-Natal, in Limpopo, in the Northwest, Northern Cape. All our provinces need to have that spirit, right, of entrepreneurship. For me, I think when it comes to our policy, the government's policy needs to aim at making sure that entrepreneurs really they grow faster, and that things like red tape and regulations that increase the cost of doing business, that gets scrapped out, right? And my view is that even where there is potential to succeed when it comes to entrepreneurs, I am in favor. For example, I was in favor of the 200 billion rands last year that was aimed at, giving businesses a leg up after the lockdowns, right? I'm in favor of those things, right? If there's potential, government can fund those things, of course, with T's and C's, because nothing can be free. So that those businesses can grow. So funding those businesses to have a starting point, if the ideas are there and there's potential and they're doing well, wherever they may be, we can do those, those kinds of funding. But also it can't be just government funding, because that's taxpayers' money, and have the private sector as well, encourage the private sector, work with the private sector to do the investment drive, in those smaller communities, right? So that you are able to create an environment where business really thrives and employs people, because I believe in business employing people, not government employing people.
Absolutely.
So for me, we need a private sector that grows, continues to grow, right? And I'm not talking about big corporates here, Andrew. I'm talking about SMEs in townships, in small towns, as I said earlier. Those are the areas of the economy that we need to push and grow. And it takes the right fundamental economic policy to achieve that, to push for the growth of those SMEs, which I think they play a huge role and should play a huge role in the economic development of the country.
Yeah, I suppose one of the unforeseen sort of results, which could speak into that, is you mentioned places like the Eastern Cape, Northwest, all of the smaller provinces. Growing up, as I did, I grew up in the Eastern Cape, small town Queenstown. Very few of my schoolmates actually ended up staying in the town and the province. Once they'd finished school, they went to university, they found jobs in the big metropolitan areas. One of the unforeseen effects of work from home, we before we came on, we were speaking about work from home now. A lot of people now, we've seen this almost diaspora from the urban centers to these smaller places from a property price perspective, et cetera, et cetera. So that could potentially have an impact, unforeseen impact, and maybe not on a large scale, but it could have that. It was going, well, I'm moving back to my hometown. What can I do there? What can I do to earn money? I've been remote working. Well, I can do that. Yeah. Now I'm spending my money that I was spending in Johannesburg or Cape Town. I'm earning potentially the same money. I can spend it in my local community. Or alternatively, I can move back home and go, well, how do I start a business? How do I make money? I can start a business within my local community potentially. Is that something that potentially you might see as an element that could have an impact?
Well, for every challenge, there's an opportunity. And the challenge of COVID-19, how it is, we're talking about how it has reshaped how we work. Part of that reshaping process emerged opportunities. People who, because I mean, let's take the worst case scenario, right? I lose my job in Joburg, my car is repossessed, I can no longer pay the rent. I have to go back home to KwaZulu-Natal, right? Now, when I go back at home KwaZulu-Natal, I'm young, I will need to do something, right? To continue to sustain my life, my livelihood. And that forces you in that way to change how you think, the circumstances, which are unfortunate in a way, kind of change your mindset. It also, of course, you get relocated to KwaZulu-Natal in a small town or a small area, wherever it may be. You now need to think what it is that I can do from an entrepreneurship point of view for me to survive going forward. Now, that's the worst case scenario. There will also be somebody who says, well, I still have my job, as we've just said now. I still have my job, I'm doing okay, I can work from home, but to reduce the cost and maybe invest my money in something else, and maybe let me just go home, right? And stay at home, I don't have to pay rent, and then I can think of what I can do as well to empower myself or to grow myself. Now, to what extent that has taken place over the past year, we don't have data to back that up. But we do acknowledge that there are such opportunities can emerge or are emerging, right, to a certain scale. And now what this challenge of COVID-19 and government's response to it, what it does is that it also reminds us that this kind of sophisticated development push and opportunities and so on, we shouldn't concentrate them in big metropolitan areas where it's Joburg, it's Cape Town, it's PE, it's Durban. Let's not do that. Let's try and expand the idea of entrepreneurship opportunities, even in remote areas, right? In rural towns or in rural places, because we don't know what's going to come up in future, right? And by the way, those people who have moved to back home, if back home had greater opportunities, right? There was a strong entrepreneurship ethic.
Yeah.
There was growth in development and so on. Maybe even initially they would have stayed there and worked, right, instead of coming to big metropolitan areas. So in a way, it brings a challenge to policymakers that how do you sort of create an environment in public policy when, if you are, where there are opportunities even in remote areas, in rural areas, where people can make income and grow and be successful in entrepreneurship or business, that it sort of shapes the way we think. And we need to think about that now going forward, because really we've entered a new way of doing things as a people, not just in South Africa, around the world as well. It's about time that our thinking goes as far as, sort of applying our minds as to how to go about bringing those areas that we basically saw as remote places of Christmas holidays or places of where you just run away from chaos and so on. Yeah. So places where actually people can conduct business. So I think that's what it just poses a challenge to. So it's an opportunity in a way for that our policymakers need to acknowledge and work towards putting policies that will get us to the desired level.
If you had to, if I'm a young entrepreneur sitting in front of you now, what would be your biggest sort of piece of advice to me? I'm starting out. What would be your biggest piece of advice? But you on the spot. Let's go.
Biggest advice. I think each and every entrepreneur has to spot opportunities, right? I think that's very, very important. As an entrepreneur, you need to spot opportunities. Where are they? Assess your market environment, assess what would be the negative impacts in that market, do your projections, do your scenarios, have different scenarios, right? If South Africa becomes this, what will happen to me? If South Africa becomes that, what will happen to me? Do different scenarios as an entrepreneur who wants to start out. Also, continuously seek funding, right? Now, I'm not talking about government funding. Right? I'm not really a big fan of all the time we go to government to want things and so on. I'm not into that. But seek, even a private person can see if you are driven and you have an idea and you're already doing great work. That person, right, whether it's a private person in the form of a corporate or a private investor, whether it's in South Africa or overseas, if you have something that is driving in your space, of course they will come in and want to invest in you, right? So for me, spotting opportunities, doing the critical market assessment as to how things will go, including making scenarios and projections and how that will shape your business. I think it's very important. Push to get funding wherever it may be. And people, if they see potential about who you are and what you want to do, they will invest in you, right? And also, you need to think about this, Andrew, and that is, I always say that for South Africa to grow speedily, we need to believe in the idea that we need to produce more goods and services. Production is what will reduce poverty, right? and bring us up to prosperity. It's production of goods and services. And it must be the goods and services that the world wants.
Yeah.
Right. Something we can sell. You can't produce something that no one wants to buy. Right. If it's technological herb, or it's a specific good that you want to sell, or it's a specific service, it's got to be something that the South African market demands and would want to buy it. Right. And beyond South Africa, it must be something you should also think about that if I were exposed to the international market, what would happen? Right. So it must be something that even the world wants to buy. You can't just produce for the purpose or for the intention of just producing. It must be the good or the service that the market demands. So I think if you can have that kind of thinking, you are likely to make an impact in the country and for yourself and in your life as well. And we need more entrepreneurs in the country. We need that growth. It is critical given the amount of unemployment that we face in the country, which is shocking even by global standards. It's very, very shocking.
Well, it's great advice. So thank you very much for that. Last question before we sort of sign off. As an economist, as a political commentator, you tend to be able to take a long view and be an observer of what's taking place. At your core, are you positive about South Africa? Are you going, if we all come together and we get this right and we have that, we make a plan, or are you tend to be on the negative side to go, well, if we don't do this, this is the road that we're going to go down?
Well, of course. I mean, I've always said that if we do X, Y, Z, we'll be on the right track. If we continue with where we are going to have a big problem.
Yeah.
And when I say this, I always tend to again touch on the voters who really have the power to shape the direction of the country and put in people who really can understand or at least have a better understanding on how the economy works. Right. Yeah. So I've always said, Andrew, that South Africa is an opportunity, and given how it's located in the world, where you basically have two oceans, right? And you have countries that are so unfortunate in Africa that they are landlocked. They don't have any ocean. Because if you have oceans, it means that you have an opportunity to make your world much better than other countries, right? And we're a young nation as well. We are a democracy that is young, so there's an opportunity in that space. So we do have the power to shape the direction of the country. So, but your question is, am I pessimistic or optimistic? A pessimist on South Africa? Because my great concern is that we are not really, as citizens, utilizing the power of our vote. But by the way, I must say this, if there's only one thing that still makes me a little bit optimistic, is the fact that the judiciary remains independent. You see, Andrew, if you've lost the judiciary in the country, where it is hijacked by politicians, they are bribing it, the constitutional court, there are various appointments happening almost on a daily basis for the political agendas. The moment you've lost the judiciary in the society, then it's all over completely. It's all over. Yeah. It's gone, right? And we haven't reached that phase in South Africa. Jacob Zuma is in jail, the former president of the country. Can you believe that? Now, you may disagree with whatever of the specifics around that case or how it's being treated, but there is that independence of the judicial system. Yeah. And for me, so long as that exists, I think my spirit will at least be, be here to an extent.
Absolutely. And I think that also for me listening to you, it's again, that personal responsibility that gives me hope is that we all do have a role to play. It's not the fact that we are a product of our environment, that it's all government's responsibility to take care of everything and fix everything. As individual South Africans, we've got opportunity to take personal responsibility, whether it's regards to getting out to vote, or alternatively taking ownership in terms of our own businesses, and really looking at opportunities, like as you said, to really grow as individuals and then obviously as a collective. So Phumlani,
before we continue,
there
is a 5-point formula that I have been preaching over the past year of how we individuals in South Africa can move forward as a country. And I have said that, especially I've been directing this to mostly young people. Pursue education intensely, right? Get educated, get skilled, right? And it must be education that is demanded around the world. The education whose skills are being demanded in the world. You can't just study anything. You must, avoid having children you can't afford, because there is a troubling trend out there where young people are having kids they cannot afford. And I always say that what you need to do as well is to save and invest a portion of your income. Whatever little income you may get, save and invest a portion of it. And I always say you should have a strong work ethic. Work hard as an individual, because at the end of the day, really it's you will make a difference in your life. So work very hard. And then the fifth one is a controversial one. And I'm not sure why it's controversial, because the data shows that the two-parent households, right, or people who are in a marriage process, people who are married, their economy is better than a single-headed or one-person household.
Yeah.
For that reason, I encourage people that get married at some point in your life. The house you'll be staying in will have a better economy. We'll have a better economy by size, by income that comes in, because two people are are getting income, are making money. So those 5 points are what I think we need to preach in the country, that we as citizens, we need to live by on a daily basis, especially young people who still want to have a better future. If they don't do any of those things I'm talking about, no matter the kind of public policy you put in place, they won't achieve as much. And we continue to complain about income inequality, poverty, they don't have opportunities, because really they are not pushing as individuals to do the 5 things that I've just mentioned.
5 points of wisdom from Phumlani to end off the day. Listen, it has been absolutely fantastic having you. Thank you so much for your insight and your time. It's a conversation I've thoroughly enjoyed. I'd love to have you back at some point in the near future to go, listen, how's the last 6 months been? Have we seen improvement? Hopefully in a year's time as well, maybe. But again, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it. And for all the advice and the wisdom that you shared with us. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be on your podcast. I hope I spoke well. Your listeners will forgive me. I tend to swallow words and think a bit, but I hope the message came across quite well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself, and we'll chat soon again.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers.